Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I don't know how often you can say a city agency is a treasure, but I believe that's what the Department of Records and Information is. It operates the municipal archives, the municipal library, and the records center, and it's where you can find all kinds of information, both important and charming. Pauline Toole is the commissioner, and she's my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you want to tell us a little bit about it? You've got 3 different responsibilities. Is the overarching kind of thing the openness of the government, availability of information? Is that part of it?
It is about preserving and making available government information. So the 3 parts of the agency fit together, and they were separately created and then combined into one agency in 1977. Initially, there was the municipal library, which was a subset of the New York City Public Library, and created in 1912. And its job was to gather information and make it available to city policymakers. This was, during the Progressive era, so people wanted to know what was going on in other places, what changes were being made, and New York lawmakers in some ways were in the forefront of creating laws and regulations that improved people's living conditions and working conditions. So the library was meant to give them information. It existed for a very long time. It had this wonderful woman, Rebecca Rankin, as the librarian for decades, and she realized that there was a lot of material that was being held by various city agencies, and thought, oh, we better consolidate that because these are our historical records. And a large chunk actually came from what had been the original city council, so that's some of the really old manuscripts in the library and archive. And then she brought in all this materials, like we have all these Dutch records. Our oldest record is from 1625. It's the deed to an area of Brooklyn that was given to a very interesting lady, Lady Deborah Moody, and then up through the Bloomberg administration. And the challenge with that is to take all of these older materials and preserve them and digitize them now. And we began in earnest in 2014 to build a digital platform, and in the next several years it will be like going to the Smithsonian or the Library of Congress, and you'll be able to sit in your home and look up all these interesting historical records. And I think that's particularly important because New York really was in the forefront of making so much change, not just in the Progressive era, but through succeeding administrations. And the archive is fabulously interesting, but because it was born out of the library part is also interesting. And the only difference between the two is that the library holds material that largely was published. So the original proceedings of the Central Park Commission, they're in the library. The drawings of Central Park, they're in the archive. So you need those 2 pieces to come together to really be able to research and tell the full history of any aspect of the city. And then the final piece is records management. That was a discipline, and it started when everyone was filing things A to Z, or 1 to 10, year to year, in a file cabinet, and now with the explosion of computers and multiple copies, it's all digital. And we as a city are trying to get our arms around managing all the records we create digitally.
So what are the records? I mean, are the records of legislation and policies?
So the city charter defines records, and it defines it very broadly. It's any item, regardless of the format, video, computer disk, whatever, anything you create in the course of doing your city business, anything you create or receive.
A contract?
A contract is a city record. Now, not every city record has historical value, so the records management group comes up with records retention schedules, and they set the period of time a record should be retained by the agency, and then there's a process that requires several levels of approval before the records can be disposed. Like in case it's a record that's the subject of litigation, you don't want to throw it out and then get slapped by the courts. But in that process, if it is a historical record, it goes to the archives, and the archivists evaluate its real purpose and how it should be treated and named and all of that, and it goes forward. So records management is the beginning of the process, and the archives and the library are the end, yeah.
And so the library and the archives are really interwoven.
They are. And, you know, traditionally, after Rebecca Rankin retired, they were treated as two separate silos. But if you're a researcher and you go to the library to find something and no one tells you what's in the archives, you are going to feel like you were shortchanged. So we've really been working to merge them back, cross-train staff, have staffs from both departments provide reference services to the public. And, you know, we deal with about 60,000 inquiries every year. People emailing, calling, walking in, asking for different kind of research assistance.
And it's all in this beautiful building.
My God, it's the prettiest building New York City owns.
It's amazing.
Oh, yes.
The Surrogate building. Is that what it's called, the Surrogate Court? Is that the formerly?
It was initially built as the Hall of Records, but it was renamed the Surrogate Court. And at one point, there was an effort to get rid of City Hall and replace it with this new building and then do something else with the property below Chambers. But the state didn't like that. The state passed a law that said you can't get rid of City Hall. It was okay, so much for a local rule. But then this building became the Hall of Records, and it was always the split between record keeping and the Surrogates Court. And most of the records were from other agencies, like the Department of Finance was there for a while. Different civil service work happened there.
If people haven't been there, they've got to go there. And you have a blog also. And one of the things on the blog was about the renovation of that building.
Right.
Because it's so beautiful and it has these beautiful skylights that were leaking. So it got all closed up.
The Department of Citywide Administrative Service and the Department of Design and Construction ran a project that started in November. It was supposed to run for 2 years, and it got finished early.
Ooh.
And it was to repair the skylight. And people who had worked in that building for 20 plus years had never seen that area without the tarpaulin covering it. So now it's open and they restored the top. It makes it even more beautiful.
Yeah.
And the whole lobby was closed off during construction. We felt very deprived. But now it's open again and you can see across. And, it's spectacular.
And does that project go into your records?
Yes, the records of that. This is probably too much in the weeds, but the records of most of the Department of Design and Construction projects are permanent because they're about the rehabilitation of buildings and the construction of buildings, and so people keep going back to them. But at some point, they may transfer them to us.
Does the Buildings Department go back to them?
The Buildings Department may well, or they may, when they're planning things, talk to each other. But we do have another project that is taking blueprints filed with the Buildings Department for Manhattan, I believe, below 36th Street, that date from the late 19th century through, I don't know, 1950 or something. And they start from when the Department of Buildings was created. Before that, people would just put things up, and then they had to have a buildings department to regulate what was put up, and people had to come in and file the blueprints. And some of them are really beautiful because they show these ornate buildings, and an old, like, 2-story place that was built in colonial times was going to be torn down or rehabbed. So it shows all of that, and that's really cool.
This is what I wondered. When I worked in the Lindsay City Hall. I somehow remember putting all my papers and files in boxes. Where did they go? Did they go to you?
They went to the municipal archives.
So would they still be there?
They are there, and that's a collection. We have about 243 cubic feet. Now, cubic foot is like a regular little moving box, banker's box. We have 243,000 of such boxes. We have not processed all of it. It takes a lot of time, and the agency was not funded very well for 20-some years after David Dinkins left office. But the archivist really did bring in money to bit by bit process most of the mayoral collections, which date to the 19th century and include the Lindsay
And that means
records.
the staff also.
The staff also.
That's so interesting. And there's so many things. So tell me things that are in the archives. I mean, that's what's so fascinating.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I started
and when
with
you
the oldest.
digitize something, is that it? Do you have to raise money for that? Is there enough in the budget to do that?
We've been growing our budget religiously since 2014, and some funding for the digital platform has come through the tax levy funds. We also do a lot of grant writing, and we've been able to bring in money that way. But there are a variety of, there's an archival society that Paul O'Dwyer created that supports the work of the archives, and it takes in contributions, and it can help spotlight programs that it might want to support. But mostly it has been through tax levy funding.
Okay, so tell me about the archives.
So, it's hard to know where to start, but I'm going to just focus a little bit on two of the most glorious collections, three of them actually. So one is the drawings for Central Park, and we have hundreds of them. They're drawn by Olmsted, Vaux, and Raymold, so the three principal designers. They each had a different role. Olmsted was more of the planner and the organizer, and Raymold has this very delicate work. And you can read more about it because we have a book coming out in April. And you can
good.
Pre-order it on Amazon.com. Abrams publishing it for us, and it'll be on Amazon. And
do you
people
get
can
money for
pre-order.
that?
It's in the contract. There's a percentage of the sales that comes to the city. It comes to the city's general fund, not to the department. But that's okay.
But
We
you
have to
remember that
produce
at budget
revenue.
time.
We have to
Yeah,
produce
right.
revenue. Anyhow, they're beautiful, and they start with what is a large plan that had hung at the arsenal for a very long time, but it is the actual submission that Olmsted made to the Central Park Commission for the design of the park. So we start with that, and then there are beautiful hand drawings of the design for tile work in various places, the design of Belvedere Castle, you just go on and on and on, the transit roads that go over the bridges, and it's gorgeous. And so people will get a sense of that, and you can take the book or an app from the book and go through Central Park and see the remnants, or the rest, the still existing sort of structure of the park that dated to those drawings. We also have the Brooklyn Bridge drawings, and they are pretty stunning. And some of them are really unusual. There's a whimsy to a lot of them. I think because Washington Roebling he got the bends, right? And he was stuck over in Brooklyn Heights looking down on construction. He couldn't go. He would send his wife, thank God for her.
What do you mean he got the bend?
Workers were going beneath the surface of the water. The change in pressure caused...
So it was underwater for the basic construction?
Yes, it caused a physical reaction. It was very debilitating. Many people died from them.
Oh, really?
In any case, he was up there, and his drawings, one of the caissons, which is a working drawing, he watercolored it. Like, why would you do that? So those are two really interesting collections. They're very visual. And a third collection that I spend a lot of time going through, I used to think I could go every Friday and do some work in it, but it's the collection from Mayor LaGuardia. And it's extensive and documents such a tumultuous time in New York history, American history, world history, and he played a role across the board, right? And so there's information about regulating push carts or food sales, or there's information about broadcasts to Italy to talk about being anti-fascist. And
the WPA.
The WPA, and we have right now this really interesting exhibit up called Feeding the City, which was based on our WPA collections. And it was a group of writers in the Federal Writers Project. They researched New York's role as a commercial hub for food that drove the national and international food economy. And so they have information they've gleaned from all over the world, and they wrote it and they rewrote it. It was edited and is never published. But we have the manuscript, so the exhibit is up, and we put images from it. It's kind of fun. But yeah, we have a full WPA collection of many manuscripts that were
and wonderful things.
Yes.
Wonderful projects too.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about when we talk about LaGuardia. You brought these engravings and these things. What are these?
So these are bonds that the city issued in 1937. This one is for the construction of rapid transit railroads. And it's signed by both Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia and his comptroller. It was issued in 1937. It was fully redeemed in It was issued in 1939. It was fully redeemed in 1976. And we have a lot of them. We're selling them right now because we have a lot of them. And there are collectors, but it has this wonderful embossed seal and the coupons people would, bring in.
They're all so pretty. Well, the
Yes.
engraving, I mean, it's
Yes.
it's matches or surpasses the money that we're used to.
Yes, our currency, right?
And then
And the
over the
backs are
side.
beautiful, so
Yeah.
very nice, right?
So we can find all these things in your.
You can find all of these things at our agency or online at our website, which is a New York City government website, nyc.gov/records, or just Google Municipal Archives.
And then, I was looking at the different announcements and stuff. You had a project of, so you get police records
Yes, we do.
and you got police films
Yes,
too.
it's a particularly interesting collection.
When you get police records, what does that mean?
We don't get, we get records from the police department, we get records from the district attorneys at the end of their retention period. So with the district attorneys, it's 25 years after the case is closed, and then they come to the archives, and the archives will determine whether or not they're of value. The police records, it's a similar thing, but the particular records that you're referencing are police surveillance film from 1960 through the 70s. They were the subject of a lawsuit, the Handshoe lawsuit, which contended that the police department was violating people's First Amendment rights by infiltrating their organizations and spying on them. And they were. But in the course of the litigation, the judge required, it went back and forth. First, the plaintiffs, the people wanted them all to be destroyed, and then the NYPD wanted them all to be destroyed, and the judge said, no, you now have this thing called the Department of Records and Information Services.
Good for him.
Transfer them there, and they will figure out what to do with them. So they got transferred to us at some point. But they're remarkable, not because of the police surveillance, but unwittingly, those officers became historians. And so we had an exhibit up based on these records, and we started with a button from the March on Washington and went through this sort of social and political history that you and me a little bit lived through. And anti-war march, the tape of the first
there was a detective or a sergeant, whatever he was, plain clothes with white hair, a young guy with white hair. Everybody recognized him in a lot of these different parades. It was fascinating. Bella always complained with the women's strike and the anti-war stuff and all of those.
Yes. Yeah. And they're all there.
And they're all in your archive.
Yes. And so one large part of that collection was film. And for our exhibit, we only had the resources to digitize a small portion of that film. So it was the first Earth Day March, it was anti-war marches, it was a bunch of activists protesting in front of the courthouse in the Black Panther trial. It was this gripping, I found, not the best quality, but gripping footage of gay activists protesting at a time.
I was going to ask about that because it's coming up to June now, which is the anniversary, it's the 51st anniversary, I guess, of Stonewall, and the 50th anniversary of the first Gay Pride Parade. And I was there when they negotiated with the police department. Now, would that record be in your archive?
I don't know that record is in our archive. We'd have to go back and look. It would depend on how it was, how it was classified.
The first march went from Sheridan Square up 6th Avenue, but it was two abreast on the sidewalk. I mean, not on the sidewalk, on the street at the gutter. And of course, it wasn't two abreast. They filled up the whole thing.
Yeah. We'll go back and look and see what documentation
you should see what you have for that because of it coming up again.
Right. There's a whole committee that's working on organizing events and showing the history dating from that. And they obviously should be talking to you.
No, not to me.
Yes.
Are you? The committee is from your agency?
No, it's an came about organically, and I know the NYPL has been a big player. The New York
great.
Public Library has been a big player in organizing
that's
things.
so good.
So we're
So it's a
part of
close
it, but
connection.
we're not the organizer. We're happy to be
Yeah.
contributing.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say, we did get a fund to digitize all the rest of those police
Oh, good.
surveillance films.
So you
and-
wrote a proposal for that?
Yes, and we should have a film night and screen them
And
because.
have.
But when we had the exhibit up, people would come and find themselves like, oh, there I am. It was fun.
Now, what's that card for?
This we in 2014 started a project called Women's Activism.NYC. It's to commemorate women winning suffrage, and part of it is a crowdsource catalog that lists women
that's
who are
interesting.
inspiring.
Oh, great.
Right, and they can be from any place. They can be from any age. They don't have to be the famous people. They can be the lady down the street who runs a soup kitchen or the teacher who inspired
great.
you. And so we want to put all those stories, collect them, and then add them to the archives. Because, quite frankly, our archives are organized by mayoral administration. All of the mayors to this point have been men. And they're women and people of color, Indigenous people, are largely written out of the archives. They're not in how the archives are described. And an example that we did, an example of that would be, we were doing an exhibit on issues of concern to women as reflected in the city's archives. And one of the topics was pay equity. It's alive today, alive then. So there's a collection in, I think, Mayor Strong, and it's called Education Letters. But what it is a collection of letters written actually over to several different mayors about giving women teachers pay equity. Because when the city consolidated in 1898, the state legislature passed a pay bill that set a salary structure for male and female teachers that paid men more, even though women were by far the vast number of teachers, and it didn't matter. It wasn't like the women were teaching elementary and the men were teaching high school. So they're called education letters. But only if you were digging through and looking for something that you blundered upon them would you realize that this is a collection of letters about pay equity. And in those same files, there's a copy of the testimony that was delivered at the state legislature. It was the first time women testified in Albany about anything, and it was from these women teachers. So
Can volunteers come and work with you? It's hard.
It's hard. We don't have a volunteer program. We have a very strong intern program, and we have a really good connection with Reserve that works with retirees, and they bring their skills to us, which is great. We haven't really been able to put together a volunteer program. We've begun to talk about it, but it requires
So if you're a
resources.
retiree, you could go through.
Reserve, it's a program that was Herb Sturz created it initially, and it brings in people of all sorts of disciplines. We have a wonderful person with us now who worked in marketing, and we want to get the word out about our
Because
materials.
you sell things.
Yeah, and we want people to know about the.
Right.
So
Can we briefly talk about the taxpayer project?
yes, the tax photos.
We only have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Oh my God! I'm sorry, I was chattering
No,
along
that's
there.
too much. It's good. You'll come back.
Okay. So the tax photo project, New York City documented every single piece of property in the city at 2 different times with photography. One was in the WPA era between 1939 and 1941. And we just recently completed a project to digitize all of those. And then the other was in the 1980s, and those mostly are in some sort of weird color. And we're embarking on a project to get those digitized. But they show what New York looked like then. And you see people on the street, and you see funny cars, you see, old stores with, funny looking fashions, and they're great. And
So if you know your lot number and your borough and everything else, but it also helps you look it up because
Yes.
there's an address slide, and you see the tax, what do you call him, assessment guy? What do
yes,
we,
the tax assessments.
yeah, he's holding up a sign, and then you see the building. But it's so appropriate now with all the discussions about property taxes. I wonder how much, do you have the actual prices?
We do. We have.
It'd be so interesting
We
to
have
see.
called property tax cards, nothing too creative about that, but it lists every time there was a property transfer, it lists what the sale was and what
so
the cost
interesting?
was. Yes, it's really interesting, and you look back at it and you think, oh my golly, have prices really skyrocketed so much in the last 20 years compared to their more methodical increases
Yeah.
prior to that. Yeah,
Right. It's amazing,
yeah, it
isn't
really
it?
is.
Yeah. So you can look at this online. You could, what's the website, which we've supered. You can read the blogs. You can look at collections. You
can
can
come
get
visit us.
information and certainly go visit.
Yes.
There are always pictorial exhibits. Do you have other exhibits now, more than just the feet? I mean, are there more than one exhibit
We
at a
only have
time?
one exhibit. We have a basement area with an exhibit into.
And
we're
people can
curating
go
it.
to the archive?
Yes, absolutely. It's open to the public.
can-
We're even open on every other Saturday
Right.
for people who can't come during the
Oh,
week.
that's so great. And you also have the portal for filing of FOILs.
Oh yeah, this goes into our municipal library work because that really we have all government agencies are required to provide their reports digitally to us, and from that we built out a portal so every agency uses it to intake and respond to people's requests for information under the Freedom of Information law. And it's great because let's say you wanted something, someone else wanted it, it's already there. You don't have to go through the process. It's published
Yeah,
online.
right.
So it's really,
So
it's great. Yeah.
So please go see it, right? and order things.
Oh yes, help
It'll
us
help.
build our
It doesn't
build our
help directly,
revenue.
but it'll help later.
Oh, it does.
Thank you so much for coming.
It's a pleasure.
Thank
It's
you.
a real pleasure.